Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you could join me today. Before we dive into today's story, I want to thank you for being here. We've got something really special to share with you, so sit back, relax, and let's journey together through this tale. Are you ready? Let's begin. Under the deepening dusk, the temples of Angkor stood as sentinels of time, ancient and unmoving, their stone faces whispering tales of dynasties long forgotten. The wind light and soft brushed over the moss-covered surfaces, carrying with it a scent of earth and ancient incense. The air was heavy with history, the kind that filled the chest with awe and a gentle sense of reverence. A figure moved slowly among the ruins. He was a monk, his robe a soft orange against the gathering shadows. His feet bare and silent against the cold stone made no sound as he walked the sacred grounds. His name was Viro, a man of few words, yet one whose presence seemed to command an almost divine stillness. The evening was neither too warm nor too cool, but there was a stillness that seemed to carry with it an unspoken invitation. The fireflies, tiny sparks of light in the twilight, began to dance around him, their movements delicate and purposeful as though they were his only companions in this vast and sacred place. As Viro walked deeper into the temple's heart, a distant bell tolled its sound, a low resonating hum that seemed to reverberate through the very stones. The monk paused for a moment, his face serene as if listening to a voice only he could hear. The stone temples watched him, patient as time. Viro had walked these grounds for many years. The temple was his home. Its towering stone walls and ancient pillars were as familiar to him as his own breath. Each step he took across the vast sacred grounds felt like a ritual as ingrained in him as the chants he recited at dawn. Yet tonight, as he walked under the vast expanse of a twilight sky, the path seemed different. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, as if the very earth beneath his feet was alive, calling out to him in a language older than words. He could feel it in the cool stone under his fingertips, in the rustle of the wind through the trees, and in the way the fireflies circled around him, fleeting bursts of light dancing in the dusk like the flickers of forgotten memories. The temple had always been a place of peace and solitude for Viro, a place where he could meditate, reflect, and find solace in the rhythms of nature and the sacred rites that had been passed down through countless generations. Each day he traced the same steps from the central courtyard past the great stone pillars etched with gods and kings, through the halls that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. He had walked this path 1,000 times before, but tonight the path felt strange, like a familiar dream turning unfamiliar. His thoughts, as they often did during his evening walks, drifted into the quiet rhythm of the temple. He thought of the mornings when the temple came alive with the soft murmur of prayers and the low melodic chants of the monks. The temple would stir at dawn, the first rays of light spilling over the horizon, casting long shadows across the stone floors. The air would be thick with incense, and the scent of jasmine would linger like a whisper among the trees. It was during these mornings that Viro felt closest to the temple, as if he were part of something ancient and eternal. But tonight the quiet was different. It seemed to stretch further, reaching into the depths of his soul. He could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him, the weight of centuries pressing on his chest. The winds, which usually blew softly through the temple's open halls, now felt like a breath of something older, something deeper. The fireflies that flitted in and out of the shadows seemed to carry a message he could not quite understand. They swarmed around him, their tiny bodies glowing softly in the dimming light, their movements erratic and wild as if urging him forward toward something unseen. Viro paused by one of the great stone pillars. His fingers brushed against the intricate carvings that adorned its surface, the images of gods and warriors, of kings and beasts, their faces frozen in time. The carvings were like stories etched into the bones of the earth, each one telling a tale of power, sacrifice, and devotion. The gods gazed down at him from their high places, their stone eyes filled with an unspoken wisdom. Their faces, though worn by centuries of weather and neglect, seemed to shift in the fading light, coming to life in subtle ways. It was as though the stone itself was breathing alive with the memories of those who had come before. Viro reached out a hand, his fingers tracing the rough surface of the stone. The coldness of the pillar sent a shiver through his body, and for a moment he felt as though the stone had taken his hand in return. The grooves in the stone were deep, worn smooth by time and touch. His fingers glided over the shapes of an ancient king, his crown a halo of flowers, his face serene but resolute, etched with the calm determination of a ruler who had lived and died long before Viro had taken his vows. As Viro's fingers lingered on the figure of the king, a question rose in his heart. What had driven these people to carve such beauty into stone? What had compelled them to build these temples, these monuments to the divine? These were not just places of worship, they were works of art, each stone and carving a testament to their creator's devotion. What had their lives been like, the men and women who had labored to create such beauty? What had they hoped to leave behind? The question tugged at his soul, the answer elusive but always just beyond his reach. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and damp earth, and Viro slowly withdrew his hand from the stone. As he did, the question lingered in his mind, unspoken but insistent. Why had they built these temples? It was a question Viro had asked himself countless times before, but tonight it felt different. The answer seemed closer than it ever had before. He could almost hear the whispers of those who had come before him, their voices carried on the wind, the rustling of the leaves. The fireflies swirled around him, their tiny lights casting fleeting shadows on the walls of the temple as though they were leading him somewhere far deeper than the temple's outer sanctum. Viro took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment as the wind swept through the courtyard. The question reverberated through him, a call to something he couldn't name. The stones around him seemed to hum with a quiet energy, as though they were waiting for him to understand. The fireflies gathered closer, their soft glow a beacon in the darkness, and for a fleeting moment Viro felt as if the temple itself were alive, watching him, waiting for him to listen. He opened his eyes, the faint light of the fireflies dancing in the corners of his vision. The temple was silent, but he could sense its pulse, the life that flowed through it. It was as though the stone had become something more than just rock and mortar. It was a bridge, a conduit to something greater, something eternal. The answers, he realized, were not to be found in the carvings, nor in the ancient rituals that had long since lost their meaning. They were to be found in the silence between the words, in the quiet moments when one simply listened. The feeling of being watched persisted, but this time it was not a source of unease. It felt as though the gods, the very stones of the temple, were waiting for him to find the key to unlock the answers that had been buried here for so long. It was not a burden, but a gift, a responsibility to carry the weight of their wisdom into the world. Viro turned from the pillar and continued down the path, the fireflies following him like stars in the night. The wind whispered through the temple's broken walls, and for the first time he felt as though he were walking not just among stone and ruins, but through a living, breathing entity. The temple was not just a place, it was a presence, a spirit that had endured the centuries and held its secrets close, and now, as the night deepened, Viro realized that the answers he sought were within his reach, but only if he was willing to listen. As the fireflies danced around him, their light a soft, ethereal glow, he felt something stir within him, a realization that the path he had been walking for so long was not just a physical one. It was a spiritual journey, one that would lead him deeper into the heart of the temple and perhaps deeper into the mysteries of life itself. The question, why had they built these temples, remained in his mind, but now it felt less like a question and more like a challenge to uncover the truth, to understand the purpose of these sacred grounds, and to find his own place within its history. The journey, he realized, had only just begun. As Viro walked on, the fireflies lighting his way, the temple seemed to embrace him, its ancient stones welcoming him into their fold. And with each step, the answer to the question seemed a little clearer, a little closer. He did not know what awaited him at the end of this path, but he knew that he was not walking it alone. The temple was with him, its spirit guiding him toward something greater. And for the first time in a long while, Viro felt a sense of peace, as if the temple had finally opened its arms to him, ready to reveal its secrets. The night stretched on, and the fireflies danced, casting their soft glow on the stone path. Viro's footsteps were light, his heart steady as he walked deeper into the temple toward whatever awaited him. The night deepened, and with it the air grew cooler, the shadows longer, and the stillness of the temple grounds more profound. The fireflies continued their ethereal dance, their delicate bodies weaving intricate patterns in the air, their soft glow casting fleeting shadows that seemed to shift in harmony with the monk's every step. Viro's eyes were drawn to them, the little flashes of light as they darted and fluttered around him like whispers in the night. They moved with a purpose, an unspoken rhythm that felt almost alive, as if they were guiding him through the darkness, beckoning him forward. Viro walked with his gaze fixed ahead, his sandals silent against the stone path, but his mind wandered elsewhere, absorbed in the enigmatic beauty of the fireflies' movements. They were not merely insects. No, tonight they were something more. Their dance felt like a sign, an omen, a call from the temple itself. It was as if they were leading him somewhere, pulling him deeper into the temple's sacred heart, beyond the familiar path he had walked countless times before. The fireflies had always been a part of the temple, their flickering glow a common sight during the evenings. But tonight, something was different. There was a weight to their presence, a significance that Viro could not fully understand yet. The way they glided through the air, twirling and spiraling, seemed almost deliberate, like they were carrying some hidden message, one he could not yet decipher, but one that felt essential. It was a dance that beckoned him to follow, to listen, to understand. He had seen fireflies many times before, yet tonight it felt as though they were here for him, with him. It was an invitation, an entreaty from the very soul of the temple, urging him to step further into the mystery that surrounded him. As Viro continued down the familiar stone path, his thoughts drifted to the temple itself. He had lived here for years, walking its grounds, meditating in its halls, praying at its altars. To him, the temple was a place of peace, of sacred devotion. But more than that, it was a place of mystery, a place where the veil between the mortal world and the divine was thin. He had long believed that there was a kind of magic that flowed through these grounds, an energy that ran through the stones, the trees, and the water channels that carved their way through the courtyards like veins in a living body. It was a power he had always felt, yet never fully experienced, a presence that seemed to pulse gently beneath the surface of the temple's stillness. There were stories of this power passed down through generations of monks. They spoke of how the temple could connect the living to the divine, how it bridged the gap between the realms of gods and men. They said that the temple was alive, that it whispered its secrets to those who were ready to listen. Yet in all his years of service, Viro had never felt this connection. Not until tonight. The fireflies, their soft glow now more intense, seemed to respond to his thoughts.
They swirled around him, their tiny bodies reflecting the moonlight, illuminating the folds of his robe, painting him in their light. It was as if they were reaching out to him, enveloping him in their glow, inviting him to step into the mysteries they carried.
His heart quickened, not from fear, but from a deep stirring, a sensation that something was about to change. A feeling of anticipation bubbled up within him like the first stirrings of a storm on the horizon. The fireflies in their delicate beauty had awakened something within him. It was as though the temple was reaching out to him, calling him to move beyond the boundaries of his understanding, to step deeper into its embrace, to follow where it would lead. Viro's steps slowed, each one deliberate, each one bringing him closer to the unknown. He had always walked the temple grounds alone, finding peace in the solitude, in the quiet rituals that had become second nature. But tonight the solitude felt different. The air felt charged, as if the temple itself were alive, breathing with him, guiding him. He could almost hear the soft murmur of the ancient stones beneath his feet, the whisper of the wind through the trees, all leading him somewhere to something he could not yet comprehend. As he walked, the fireflies continued to swirl around him, their lights forming a gentle procession ahead of him. They seemed to create a path through the darkness, a line of glowing bodies stretching forward, beckoning him to follow. The air grew even cooler, the shadows of the temple deeper, but the path the fireflies traced before him remained clear, illuminated by their delicate glow. It was as though the darkness itself had been banished by their light, and the way ahead was now open, awaiting his footsteps. Viro's mind remained calm, his thoughts quiet as he followed the luminous trail. There was no need to hurry. He did not need to rush. He had walked this path many times, and yet tonight it was different. Tonight the temple was revealing itself to him, offering him a glimpse into something beyond the physical world, into a deeper truth that had always been there, hidden in plain sight. The fireflies, like messengers of the gods, were guiding him through the veil, showing him the way. He trusted them as he trusted the temple. It was a trust built over years of devotion, of silence, of prayer. And now it seemed the time had come for him to receive the answers he had sought all along. His pace was steady, his breath even as he walked the path unfolding before him like a dream. The fireflies led him deeper into the temple's heart, past the familiar courtyards and statues of gods, toward the sacred spaces where few had ventured. Viro had never ventured this far before, not in all the years he had lived here. But tonight something called him to move beyond the boundaries he had always respected, to step deeper into the mystery of the temple, to listen to the secrets it had kept hidden for so long. The fireflies continued their dance, their soft glow flickering like distant stars in the darkened air. They moved with grace like dancers in a ritual that had been performed for centuries, each movement deliberate and full of meaning. Viro could feel their presence now, as if they were not just insects, but living, breathing guides, their light a beacon in the darkness. He had long believed in the sacred energy of the temple, but now he felt it in a way he never had before. It was as though the fireflies were not just illuminating the path before him, they were illuminating something within him, unlocking a part of himself he had long kept buried. Viro's thoughts drifted back to the stories he had heard as a young monk, the tales of the temple's power, of the divine energy that flowed through the grounds. He had always thought of these stories as just that, stories passed down through generations, steeped in the myths of the past. But tonight he could feel that energy, feel it swirling around him, a presence that was more than just a story. It was real and it was alive. The fireflies led him through a dense grove, the trees now towering above him, their ancient branches arching overhead like guardians of the temple's secrets. The air was thick with the scent of earth and damp leaves, and the moonlight barely filtered through the canopy above. The fireflies were now the only light, their soft glow reflecting off the leaves, casting long shadows that danced along with them. It was a sacred place, a space where the boundary between the human world and the divine seemed almost non-existent. Viro felt a deep, quiet reverence settle over him as he stepped into the grove, his steps slowing, his heart thumping quietly in his chest. At the center of the grove stood an altar, ancient and weathered, draped in vines and moss. The fireflies gathered around it now, their glow intensifying as they circled above the altar. Viro stood still for a moment, his heart beating faster, as though the very stones of the altar were calling to him. The fireflies had led him here to this place this moment, and for the first time he felt the deep, undeniable pull of the temple's power. With a deep breath, Viro stepped forward, his hand reaching out to touch the altar. The moment his fingers made contact with the cool stone, a surge of energy coursed through him stronger than anything he had ever felt. It was as though the temple itself had opened its arms to him, revealing the mysteries it had guarded for centuries. The fireflies swirled around him in a final dazzling burst of light, and in that moment Viro understood. The temple had revealed itself to him not just as a place of stone and history, but as a living, breathing force, one that connected the divine to the mortal. And he, Viro, was a part of it, a part of the ancient dance that had been unfolding long before he had arrived. As the fireflies danced their final fleeting dance around him, Viro stood still, his heart at peace, knowing that the path ahead was one he was now ready to walk. The journey had only just begun. By the time Viro reached the central courtyard, the night had deepened further, and the fireflies had long since disappeared into the shadows. The last glimmers of their light had faded as if they had never been there at all, leaving only the moon high above casting its silver glow across the temple. The courtyard lay in stillness, bathed in the ethereal light, the stone pillars standing like silent sentinels around the space, and the crumbling walls, worn with time, leaning as though tired from centuries of watching over the sacred ground. The air was thick with the scent of earth, of damp stone, and the faint traces of incense still lingering from earlier prayers. The courtyard was empty, save for the altar that stood at its heart. Ancient and weathered, the altar seemed almost to blend with the surroundings, covered in a blanket of moss and thick vines that clung to it as if it too were a living part of the temple. The stone was smooth in some places, rough and chipped in others, the marks of time and devotion evident on its surface. Viro approached it slowly, his feet quiet against the stone, his heart beating steadily in his chest. He had been here countless times, walking this path, offering prayers and meditations, and yet tonight everything felt different. The temple seemed to breathe with him, its energy pulsing softly beneath the ground. He knelt before the altar, his robes brushing against the stone as he lowered himself to the ground, his hands resting gently on the cool surface. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. The silence around him felt profound, as if the world itself had held its breath. Even the wind, which usually whispered through the trees, seemed to have quieted. All that remained was the sound of his own breathing, slow and deliberate, and the faint rustling of the leaves in the distance. Viro could feel the temple's presence, its history, its power pressing down on him heavy and ancient. The weight of countless lives that had come before him, the monks who had walked these same paths, had knelt at this very altar, offering their prayers to gods long since forgotten by most. He could almost hear their whispers in the air, like echoes from a time before his own. And then, just as he thought he might lose himself in the silence, it came a whisper, faint at first, barely a breath on the wind. The voice was soft, distant, but unmistakably present. "Do you hear us, Viro?" The voice asked a question that seemed to rise from the very stones beneath him. Viro's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he wondered if he had imagined it. His eyes snapped open, but the courtyard was as still and empty as it had been before. The walls stood silent, the pillars unmoving, and the altar before him was as ancient as ever. No one was there. But the voice had been real, undenied, and it was as though it had come from within the temple itself, from the stone, the earth, the air. "I hear you," Viro whispered, his voice barely more than a breath, unsure if the temple was truly speaking to him, or if it was some trick of his mind, some illusion born of his longing for connection. The courtyard remained silent, but the air around him seemed to thicken, becoming heavier, as though the very space itself was alive, holding its breath. The weight of centuries pressed upon him. The lives of monks long gone, the echoes of prayers that had once filled these halls, the stonework that had borne witness to an entire history of devotion, struggle, and silence. He could almost feel the temple's pulse beneath his skin, a rhythm that was ancient and steady, beating like a heart. In that moment, he understood something he had never fully grasped before: the temple was alive. It was not simply stone and mortar, not just a collection of structures designed to hold the sacred, but something more. It was a living entity, a conduit to something far greater than himself, an entity that had existed long before him and would persist long after he was gone. The voice spoke again, its tone now more familiar, yet still imbued with an unsettling curiosity. "Why have you come here?" it asked, not with accusation, but with an almost gentle inquiry, as though seeking to understand the purpose behind his presence. Viro's mind raced, but his answer came quickly, a truth he had known all along, but had never voiced aloud. I came to understand," he said, his voice steady but tinged with awe. "I came to listen." The words hung in the air for a moment, as though the temple itself were considering them, weighing their meaning against the vastness of its ancient knowledge. The wind, which had been still for so long, stirred slightly around him, rustling the leaves in the distance. The earth beneath him seemed to hum with life, as if every stone, every crevice, every crack in the temple was aware of him waiting. For a long moment there was nothing, only the sounds of the night and the weight of silence. And then the voice returned, this time softer, but with a quiet command. "Then listen, monk, for tonight the fireflies will lead you where you need to go." The words sent a shiver down Viro's spine, a chill that was both unnerving and somehow comforting. He had come to the temple seeking answers, seeking understanding, and now it seemed the temple itself was offering him a path. He had long believed in the power of the temple and its ability to connect the earthly to the divine. But now, in this moment, it was as if the temple were alive with intent, guiding him towards something unknown, something waiting to be discovered. Viro stood slowly, his body moving with a grace that came from years of disciplined practice. The moonlight bathed the altar in a soft silver glow, casting long shadows across the stones, and for a brief moment Viro wondered if he was the only one who could hear the temple's call. He turned toward the direction the voice had come from, his eyes scanning the courtyard, the pillars, the walls, but there was no visible sign of what had spoken to him. The voice had come from everywhere, from the very fabric of the temple, from the stone and the earth, and it had seemed to fill the air around him. But now all was quiet again, save for the gentle rustling of the wind, as if the temple itself were holding its breath, waiting for him to move. With a deep breath, Viro turned back toward the center of the courtyard, where the path ahead was dimly lit by the pale light of the moon. The fireflies had returned their tiny lights, blinking on and off in the distance, swirling gently around one another in a mesmerizing dance. Their soft glow reflected off the stone, casting fleeting shadows that flickered in the night. He knew what he had to do. Viro stepped forward, his step slow but steady, his heart beating with an intensity that matched the energy pulsing beneath his feet. The fireflies hovered ahead of him, their lights now seeming to form a path, a glowing trail leading deeper into the temple grounds. The voice had said the fireflies would guide him, and Viro, trusting in the temple's power, followed them without hesitation. Each step took him farther from the familiar, farther into the heart of the temple where the answers he sought awaited him. The further he walked, the more he felt the temple's presence enveloping him. The air was thicker here, charged with a quiet electric energy that seemed to hum through the ground. It was as if the temple itself were guiding him to some ancient hidden truth, a truth that had been buried beneath the weight of time and silence. The fireflies, their glow now brighter than before, led him onward, their lights flitting through the air, drawing him toward a place deep within the temple's heart. Viro could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him, and though his mind was still filled with questions, a deep sense of peace settled in his chest. The temple was alive with purpose, and he too was part of that purpose. The answers would come in time, he could feel it. For now he simply needed to follow the path the fireflies had set before him. And so Viro continued his journey, guided by the light of the fireflies deeper into the mystery of the temple, knowing that the path ahead would reveal more than he could ever have imagined. The journey, it seemed, had only just begun. Viro stood still, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a heavy cloak. The temple's voice had spoken to him, its words stirring something deep within, but the meaning was unclear. The fireflies had led him here, yet their purpose too was shrouded in mystery. What truth was he meant to uncover? What revelation was the temple guiding him toward? The questions echoed in his mind, but the answers seemed just out of reach, elusive like the wind that whispered through the temple's sacred halls. The air around him felt thick, the scent of the earth mingling with the faint traces of incense that still lingered in the atmosphere. The once familiar path, now illuminated by the soft glow of the fireflies, stretched out before him, inviting him to follow, to walk deeper into the heart of the temple. And so he moved forward, each step drawing him closer to the unknown. As Viro walked, the stone walls that lined the path seemed to close in around him, the shadows lengthening the air, growing cooler with each passing moment. The weight of time was palpable in the very stones, their surfaces worn by centuries of devotion. Statues of gods and kings stood silent, their eyes fixed on him, their faces a mixture of serenity and solemnity, as if they too were watching, waiting for something to unfold. Some of the gods were regal, their expressions stern, while others appeared gentle, their faces softened by the years. Each figure told a story, a testament to the faith and history that had been woven into the fabric of this temple. But tonight their gazes felt different. It was as though they recognized the gravity of his journey, the quest for truth that had led him here. He continued forward, his thoughts swirling in a vortex of uncertainty until at last he reached the end of the path. There before him stood a doorway, ancient and weathered, its edges smooth and worn from centuries of use. It was a door he had passed many times before, each time with a sense of reverence and curiosity. But tonight it felt different. It beckoned to him, its presence commanding, as though it had been waiting for him all this time, as though it held the answers to the questions that had plagued his mind. The door was not just a threshold, it was a gateway, a passage to something far deeper than he could understand. Viro hesitated for only a moment, gathering his breath before he stepped forward. He reached out, his fingers brushing gently against the stone, and as he did, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as if the door itself had recognized his touch, as if it had been anticipating his arrival. The stone was cool, smooth under his fingers, but there was a vibration within it, a hum of energy that seemed to pulse from the very depths of the temple. It was a sensation that sent a shiver through his spine, one that made his heart beat faster, as if the temple itself were alive and conscious of his presence. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The sound of the creaking hinges echoed through the silence, sharp and sudden in the stillness of the temple. The door gave way slowly, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. It was dark and cool, the air thick with the scent of old stone and the faintest trace of something ancient, something forgotten. Viro stepped inside his footsteps, muted on the stone floor, his heart pounding in his chest. The fireflies, still lingering in the air outside, drifted in with him, their soft glow casting a gentle light across the room. They circled around him, their tiny bodies illuminating the chamber like stars in the night sky, drawing his gaze toward the center of the room. At the heart of the chamber stood an altar, ancient and ornate, its surface covered in layers of dust and moss, as though it had been untouched for centuries. The altar itself seemed to hum with energy, a low vibration that resonated through the air. Upon it lay a single object, a small, intricately carved stone. It was delicate yet powerful in its presence, its surface adorned with intricate patterns and symbols that Viro could not quite make sense of. It was a relic of some kind, a piece of history long forgotten by the world outside. The stone seemed to glow faintly in the firefly light, as though it contained something deep within it, something waiting to be uncovered. Viro took a step forward, his heart racing with anticipation. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached out to touch the stone. The moment his skin made contact with its surface, a surge of energy coursed through him as though a floodgate had been opened. It was a sensation unlike anything he had ever felt before, an electric charge that swept through his body, filling him with a sense of urgency, a sense of clarity. The stone seemed to pulse under his touch, its energy flowing through him like a current. And then, in the briefest of moments, everything changed. Visions flashed before Viro's eyes, quick, fragmented images that came and went in the blinks of an eye. He saw kings and queens, their faces regal, yet burdened by the weight of their crowns. He saw soldiers in battle, their bodies bloodied and bruised, fighting for a cause that seemed both noble and futile. He saw ancient temples, their stone pillars bathed in the light of a distant sun, the sound of chanting rising from within their walls. He saw sacrifices made in the name of the gods, lives lost, and lives given the price of devotion paid in blood. The images came at him in a torrent, a chaotic rush of history and myth, of glory and grief. They were not just memories, they were experiences, emotions, the very essence of the past pressing in on him from all sides. For a moment he was not Viro, the monk who had walked these temple grounds for years. He was everyone, kings and warriors, priests and peasants, his soul intertwined with theirs. His consciousness spread across time. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the vision faded. The chamber fell silent once more, the fireflies still circling above their light, no longer as intense. Viro stood there, his hand still resting on the stone, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The world around him seemed unchanged, yet he felt different. He felt as though he had crossed some invisible boundary, as though he had glimpsed something that could never be unseen. The stone beneath his fingers was cool again, the pulse of energy gone, leaving only the quiet stillness of the chamber. Viro pulled his hand away, his mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. He had found what he was looking for, but the truth was not what he had expected. The visions, the flood of memories and emotions, they had not been answers, but fragments, pieces of a larger puzzle that he could not yet comprehend. The temple had shown him its secrets, but it had also shown him something deeper, something more profound. The truth, he realized, was not something that could be understood with the mind alone. It was something that had to be felt, something that could only be grasped through the heart. The fireflies, the voice of the temple, the visions, They had all led him here to this moment, but they had not given him the answer. Instead, they had given him a deeper question, one that could only be answered through experience, through understanding, through a journey that was far from over. Viro stood alone in the chamber, the weight of what he had just experienced settling over him like a cloak. His heart was still racing, but now it felt like the pulse of something greater, something eternal. The temple had revealed its secrets to him, but it had also shown him that the path to truth was not a straight line. It was a winding, uncertain road full of twists and turns, and the only way forward was to keep moving. With a final glance at the altar, Viro turned and walked toward the doorway. The fireflies followed him, their soft glow lighting his way, as if urging him to continue to seek the truth that still awaited him. The journey was far from over, and though the path ahead was unclear, Viro knew one thing for certain. He would follow it step by step until the truth was revealed. The temple had shown him the way, and now it was up to him to walk it. Viro sat on the cold stone floor of the chamber, the small, intricately carved stone still resting gently in his hand. Its surface was cool and smooth, the delicate engravings almost alive beneath his fingertips. The room around him felt heavy, like the air itself was thick with ancient secrets that had long been waiting to be uncovered. It was a space suspended between time and eternity, where the past and present seemed to blur together. Though the weight of the moment was undeniable, there was a strange peace that had settled over him as the visions he had witnessed began to fade, slipping away like fragments of a forgotten dream. He had seen much, more than he could fully understand, perhaps. His mind had been flooded with images, kings and gods, ancient rituals and battles fought in the name of glory. But those images were only a surface layer. They had been the doorway, not the truth itself. What he had glimpsed beneath it, deep within the heart of the vision, was something far more profound, something that resonated deep within his soul. It was a truth that seemed to vibrate through his entire being, a whisper from the very stones of the temple, a murmur from the forgotten gods. For a long time, Viro remained still, his breath slow and steady, allowing the silence of the chamber to envelop him. The quiet hum of the temple filled his senses, a low, almost imperceptible sound, as though the very stones of the temple were alive, breathing with him. The only sound that occasionally punctuated the stillness was the soft whisper of wind outside, brushing against the high walls and fluttering the leaves of distant trees. In this sacred space, time seemed to stand still, as if the very air had been woven into a fabric that transcended the limitations of the world outside. The flickering light from the fireflies that had followed him into the chamber now seemed to dissipate, their glow dimming as they floated away into the corners of the room. But still Viro could feel their presence like a gentle embrace guiding him into the unknown. The weight of the stone in his hand grounded him, a reminder of the truth he had uncovered and the responsibility that had been placed upon him. And then, as if the silence itself were listening, a voice returned, breaking the stillness with its soft, almost tender tone. "What is it that you seek, Viro?" The words were not forceful or demanding, but gentle, like a soft wind brushing against his ears. You came to listen, but did you hear? Viro closed his eyes at the sound of the voice, the same one that had spoken to him before. It was the voice of the temple, the very essence of its power, its spirit reaching out to him. He tightened his grip around the stone, the weight of its presence anchoring him as his thoughts swirled. "I heard something," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But it feels like I am only beginning to understand." The silence stretched between them as though the voice were considering his response. For a long while there was no sound, only the quiet pulse of energy that seemed to emanate from the very stones surrounding him. The temple itself seemed to be waiting, its breath held in the stillness, its ancient heart beating softly with an almost imperceptible rhythm. It was a waiting, patient presence, a silence that knew he was not yet ready to fully comprehend the truth, but that the journey had begun. After what felt like an eternity, the voice returned this time with a slightly different tone. It was no longer gentle, but insistent, more urgent, as though something important was at stake. "What is it you must do, monk?" The question was clear, pressing, as if the temple itself needed an answer. Viro opened his eyes, the weight of the voice lingering in his chest. He could feel it now more than ever. The pulse of the temple, the pull of its ancient wisdom calling him to something beyond his understanding. His heart quickened not from fear, but from the gravity of the question. What was he meant to do? What path had he been chosen to walk? He sat up straighter, his back aligned with the rhythm of the temple's pulse. The stone in his hand, though small and seemingly insignificant, had revealed something profound. But what was it he had to know? He had to understand. The knowledge, the vision, it was not his alone to keep. He had been chosen to carry it, to share it, to deliver it to those who needed it most. "I must learn," he said finally, his voice growing stronger, more sure with each word. "I must carry this knowledge back to those who need it." The words felt right, like a prayer or an oath spoken from the very depths of his being. He had come seeking answers, yes, but now he knew the answer was not for him alone. It was a message, a truth that had been entrusted to him. The knowledge of the past of the gods and the forgotten kings, it was all a part of a greater whole, and it was his task to bring it to the world beyond the temple walls. The voice of the temple seemed to pause again, as though considering his words the weight of the responsibility he had just placed upon himself. The air around him hummed with the energy of ancient forces, swirling with the knowledge of generations long past. Viro could feel the presence of the monks who had come before him, those who had stood in this very chamber seeking answers of their own. And now it was his turn. His journey was only just beginning. The silence stretched on, but it was no longer oppressive. It was a silence filled with purpose, with anticipation. The temple was watching him, waiting for him to take the next step. And then finally the voice spoke once more, this time with a sense of finality. "Then go," the voice said softly. "You are ready." Viro sat there for a moment longer, his fingers still wrapped around the stone. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing against his chest, the enormity of the task that had been set before him. But beneath that weight there was a sense of clarity, a knowing that this was the path he was meant to walk. The fireflies had guided him here, the temple had shown him its secrets, and now it was time for him to share what he had learned. With a deep breath, he rose from the stone floor, the quiet hum of the temple filling the space around him. His hand lingered on the altar for a moment, a final touch of reverence for the knowledge it held. He had seen the past, and he had felt its weight, but now it was time to step into the future. The fireflies were waiting for him, their soft glow lighting the way out of the chamber, guiding him back through the temple. He knew without a doubt that he was not walking alone. The temple, its energy, its history, its power, all of it was with him, carrying him forward into the unknown. As he stepped through the doorway, leaving the sacred space behind, Viro felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He had found what he was seeking, but he also understood now that the journey was far from over. The truth had been revealed to him, but there was much more to learn, much more to share. And as he moved forward, he knew that he was not just walking for himself. He was walking for the temple, for the gods, for the kings and queens who had come before him. He was walking for the people who needed the truth, those who had forgotten, those who had lost their way. The weight of that knowledge was great, but it was a weight he would carry with honor.
With each step, the path ahead became clearer. The temple had shown him the way, and now it was up to him to walk it. The truth had been revealed, but the journey had only just begun. The chamber around Viro seemed to shift in a way that was both subtle and profound. The air thickened, vibrating with a silent energy that hummed just beneath the surface of the stone. It felt as though the very walls of the temple were drawing closer, as if the space was contracting around him, enclosing him in a cocoon of ancient power. The temperature of the room shifted imperceptibly, the coolness that had once surrounded him now thick with warmth, charged with an energy that he could feel in his bones. The atmosphere itself was alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the beat of his own heart.
For the first time since he had entered the temple, Viro felt an overwhelming sense of connection, not just to the stone, to the walls, or the grand edifice of the temple itself, but to something deeper. It was as though he had become entwined with the very essence of the place, as though the temple, its history, and its divine purpose were no longer separate from him, but a part of his being. The boundary between himself and the sacred grounds had blurred until he was no longer just a visitor, a monk walking through sacred halls. He had become one with the temple, its energy flowing through him, its ancient wisdom pressing into his soul. The fireflies which had flickered and danced in the periphery of his vision now swarmed around him once more. They moved in great swirling clouds, their tiny bodies flickering like stars against the thick darkness of the chamber. Their glow reflected off the smooth stone walls, casting fleeting patterns of light and shadow that seemed to dance in rhythm with the temple's pulse. It was as though the fireflies themselves were drawn to him, their soft glow weaving an ethereal path around his body like a celestial ribbon of light. Viro stood still, mesmerized by the sight, still holding the carved stone in his hand. The stone felt alive in his palm, its surface smooth and warm, the intricate carvings etched into it seeming to glow faintly as though they were shifting and changing, revealing hidden messages in their depths. The symbols were no longer just designs, they were part of a living story, an unfolding mystery that was now intertwined with his own. He could feel the stone's presence deep within him as though it were speaking to him, whispering secrets that were still just out of reach. And then the voice came again. It was soft, almost reverent, but there was a weight to it, an unspoken depth that made the air seem to hold its breath. "This is your gift, Viro," the voice intoned. "This is the truth you sought, but it will not come easily." The words hung in the air like a benediction, and Viro felt the full weight of them settle in his chest. The truth he had come seeking, the understanding that had eluded him for so long, had now been revealed. But there was a sting to it, a sharpness that made his heart tighten with a sense of foreboding. This truth, though it resonated with something deep within him, was not simply to be understood. It was a gift, but a gift that came with its own burdens, its own demands. The temple had shown him the path, had revealed the knowledge that he had craved, but now he knew that the knowledge would not be without its cost. Viro nodded slowly, the weight of the voice's words sinking in. He had suspected deep down that this truth, this sacred gift, would not be something easily obtained or easily understood. It was not a simple answer to the questions he had carried for so long. It was a responsibility one that would shape his future and demand much from him. The truth was not something to possess, to claim for oneself. It was something to be carried, to be shared, and in doing so, it would change the very nature of his being. The fireflies continued their dance, their movements now more purposeful. They began to move in a tight formation, their tiny bodies illuminating a path that led away from the altar toward the doorway at the far end of the chamber. The light they cast was soft and radiant, guiding him forward as though they knew the way. Viro stood still for a moment longer, watching them with a sense of wonder before he slowly stepped forward. His heart was steady now, no longer racing with uncertainty but with a sense of purpose. He could feel the pull of the temple, the energy of the place guiding him, urging him to follow the path set before him. As his footfalls echoed softly in the silence, the stone beneath him seemed to warm with each step. The ground had become alive beneath his feet, as though the temple itself were welcoming him, urging him onward. The warmth seeped into his skin, filling him with a sense of peace and resolve. The walls of the chamber, which had once seemed distant and imposing, now seemed to shift and narrow as he moved toward the doorway. The corridor beyond stretched out before him, its walls lined with ancient carvings, their images worn by time, but still clear in their purpose. The air here was heavier, filled with the weight of history, the silent whispers of those who had walked these halls before him. Viro stepped into the corridor, the fireflies still fluttering around him, their light flickering like a beacon in the dark. The walls seemed to close in slightly, narrowing as he ventured deeper into the heart of the temple. The space around him felt sacred, suffused with a sense of ancient purpose. Every step he took felt like it was carrying him closer to something he had always known yet had never fully understood. The temple was not just a place, it was a living entity, a force that had endured for centuries, and now it was guiding him, shaping his destiny. As he walked, Viro's thoughts began to clear. He had come to the temple seeking answers, but now he understood that the answers were not something that could be handed to him. They were not something to be grasped with his mind or to be understood through knowledge alone. The truth was something that had to be felt, something that could only be revealed through experience, through living it. The fireflies, the stone, the very walls of the temple, they were not simply leading him to an answer, they were leading him to himself. With each step he could feel the pull of the truth growing stronger, like a thread winding through him, pulling him deeper into the temple's heart. The path ahead was uncertain, but he knew now that it was his to walk. The gift he had been given, the knowledge of the gods, the kings, the warriors who had come before him, was not his alone. It was a gift meant to be shared, meant to awaken something in others, to spark a light in the world beyond the temple's walls. Viro continued forward, the fireflies leading him through the narrowing corridor, their light now illuminating a door at the far end, a doorway that seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. It was a threshold, a passage to something greater, something beyond. The air grew warmer again, the stone beneath his feet, smoother, almost welcoming. He reached the door and paused for a moment, his heart steady in his chest. He could feel the weight of the truth that had been revealed to him, the power of the temple, the gift it had given him. But he also knew that the journey was far from over. The truth was not an end, but a beginning. The temple had shown him the way, but now it was up to him to walk it, to carry its wisdom into the world, to share it with those who needed it most. Viro took a deep breath and stepped forward, the door opening before him with a soft creak. The fireflies swirled around him, their light casting a soft glow on the path ahead. As he stepped into the unknown, he felt the temple's presence behind him, steady and sure, guiding him into the future. The gift had been given, the journey had just begun. The deeper Viro ventured into the temple, the heavier the weight of his purpose grew, settling on his shoulders like an unseen burden. Each step seemed to draw him further from the peace he had known in his life as a monk. The quiet solace of prayer and meditation had once been enough to sustain him, but now with the visions he had witnessed, everything had shifted. It was no longer enough to walk the sacred grounds to offer his devotion and silent reverence. Something had changed, something far beyond the confines of the temple walls. He had glimpsed the truth, an elusive, radiant truth that now clung to him like a shadow, and with it a responsibility he had never known before. The fireflies, those ethereal creatures that had danced around him in the darkness, were now guiding him toward another chamber. Their soft glow illuminated the stone floor, creating a path in the dim light. Viro followed them in silence,
each step carrying him deeper into the heart of the temple, deeper into the mystery of the ancient place he had come to call home. As he passed through archways and down narrow corridors, the air seemed to change thick with the scent of incense that hung in the air like a veil. The smoke curled upward, rising like whispers toward the high vaulted ceiling, each tendril of smoke dancing and swirling in its own quiet rhythm. At last he entered a vast chamber, larger and more open than any he had encountered before. The space felt different, more sacred, more solemn, as though it were a place of true reverence, not just for the gods, but for something deeper, something beyond comprehension. At the center of the room stood a statue of the Buddha, its serene face looking down on Viro as he entered. The statue was magnificent in its simplicity, carved with such grace and precision that the stone seemed to breathe the calmness of the Buddha's expression, radiating a deep sense of peace.
Viro felt small in the presence of such stillness, but he did not shrink from it. Instead, he felt himself drawn to it as though the very presence of the Buddha was calling him to kneel before it, to offer himself in quiet prayer. The fireflies hovered around him, their tiny lights creating a soft halo in the dimness of the chamber. They fluttered gently as if honoring the sacred space, their light casting delicate shadows that danced across the stone walls. Viro knelt before the statue, his robes whispering against the cool stone floor. His hands pressed together in silent prayer, his eyes closed, and his mind drifted back to the visions he had seen, visions that had changed everything. He had seen the rise and fall of empires, the glory of kings who had built great cities only to see them crumble to dust. He had witnessed the fierce struggles of warriors battling for honor, for territory, for their gods. The faces of those who had lived and died for causes greater than themselves flashed before his mind's eye. But it was not just the kings, the warriors, or the gods that stayed with him. It was the faces of the people, the ones who had built these temples, who had carved the gods into stone with their hands, who had labored in the shadows to create something beautiful, something eternal. They were the unsung heroes, the nameless ones whose lives were woven into the fabric of the temple's history. The work they had done, the sacrifices they had made, had outlasted them all. It was they who had created the sacred space that now stood before him, enduring through time and change. Viro's heart stirred as he recalled the faces of the people, their tired eyes, their hands roughened by years of labor, their devotion unspoken but palpable. They had poured their lives into the stones, into the sacred carvings that adorned every pillar, every altar. They had created something that would endure beyond their lifetimes, something that transcended the fleeting nature of human existence. The realization hit him like a wave. The truth he had sought was not just about the gods, not just about the kings or the warriors, but about the people. The laborers, the builders, the ones who had worked in silence, they were the true keepers of the temple's spirit. And then the voice returned, soft but clear like a whisper in the wind. "Your purpose is not just to walk these halls," Viro, the voice said, its tone gentle yet filled with an undeniable gravity. "Your purpose is to teach." Viro's eyes fluttered open, and the weight of the words settled over him like a thick mantle. He blinked, trying to process the message that had just been delivered, but the words felt too large, too heavy for him to fully comprehend. What did it mean? To teach what he was, but a monk, a humble servant of the temple. He had no grand wisdom, no profound understanding to offer. He had come seeking knowledge, yes, but to teach others, to share the truth of what he had learned. It seemed impossible. His hands tightened around the stone. He still held the small carved relic that had been placed in his care. It was a symbol of the knowledge he had uncovered, but it was more than that. It was a burden, a responsibility. And the voice seemed to know it. Viro could feel the weight of that responsibility settling deeper into his soul. To teach what Viro whispered, his voice barely audible, as though asking the question aloud might make the enormity of it real, might reveal the truth he had not yet fully understood. To teach the world the truth you have found, the voice responded, its tone unwavering, filled with quiet certainty. The truth of these stones, the truth of the fireflies, and the truth of the divine. Viro felt a stirring deep within his chest, a strange mixture of awe and fear. The temple had shown him so much: the rise and fall of empires, the sacrifices of kings and warriors, the labor of those who had worked in the shadows to create something eternal. But there was more to the truth, more to this divine mystery that had been revealed to him. The fireflies, the stones, the carvings on the walls, they were not just symbols. They were living messages, each one a part of a greater whole, a story that stretched back through time and reached forward into the future. And now he was to be the one to carry that story forward, to teach the world what he had learned. The enormity of it all pressed down on him, suffocating him with its weight. He had never seen himself as a teacher, never thought of himself as someone who could impart wisdom to others. He was just a monk, a humble servant of the temple, entrusted with the daily rituals and the quiet life of devotion. But now the temple had chosen him. It had revealed to him a truth far greater than he could have imagined, and it was up to him to share it with the world. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The burden was immense, but it was also a gift that would change everything. Viro's eyes dropped to the stone in his hand. The carved patterns seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light, as though they held some deeper secret, something that was still hidden from him. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the truth settling over him like a mantle of fire, like a flame that would not be extinguished. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The temple had given him its gift. Now it was up to him to carry it into the world. With a final deep breath, Viro rose from his kneeling position. The fireflies fluttered around him as if urging him forward. His heart was heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead, but it was also full of purpose. He had been given the truth, and now it was time to share it. The world outside the temple walls awaited, and he was ready to take the first step on the journey that would change everything. As he turned to leave the chamber, the fireflies circled around him, guiding him toward the door, toward his future. The temple, its ancient wisdom, and its eternal truth had entrusted him with its legacy, and now he was ready to carry it forward. The following days slipped by in a haze, each one indistinguishable from the last. The world outside the temple seemed distant and muted, as if it were no longer part of the same reality that Viro inhabited. He continued to walk the sacred grounds, his footsteps heavy, the familiar paths he had trodden for so long, now feeling foreign, as though the stones themselves had shifted beneath him. There was a weight to his movements, a new heaviness that seemed to cling to him like a cloak he couldn't remove. The temple, which had once been a sanctuary of quiet peace, now felt suffocating, its walls pressing in closer, its silence louder. The fireflies, those ethereal creatures that had once danced around him in playful swirls, now circled him like silent sentinels. They no longer glowed with the carefree brilliance they had before. Instead, their light was muted, almost solemn, their movement deliberate, as though they were watching, waiting for something. The soft flicker of their bodies reflected off the stone walls, their light casting fleeting shadows that flickered like memories. But there was no playfulness in their movement, no joy in their flight. They were like the temple itself, watching, waiting, as though anticipating some event that had yet to unfold. Viro could feel their gaze, the pressure of it on him like a weight settling on his chest. It made him uneasy, as though the fireflies were aware of something he had yet to comprehend, something beyond his grasp.
He had seen the temple's secrets, had walked through its hallowed halls, and learned its history, its divine purpose.
But now he felt that those secrets were no longer just knowledge to be understood. They were demanding something of him, something far greater than he had ever anticipated. The truth he had uncovered was not a gift to be taken lightly, not a simple answer to a question. It was a burden, a responsibility that was becoming increasingly heavy with each passing day. The weight of it pressed down on him, a constant presence in his thoughts, in his movements. There was no escaping it. The truth had been revealed to him, but now he must carry it. He must share it. But how? And with whom? The days turned into weeks, each one stretching endlessly before him. The rhythms of temple life that had once brought him comfort, the morning prayers, the evening meditations, now seemed hollow, as though the very air had changed around him. The familiar chants and rituals which had once been a balm to his soul now felt like a distant echo of something he could no longer fully connect with. His mind was clouded, his heart restless. He could no longer find solace in the simplicity of his previous life. Viro's solitude deepened. The other monks had noticed the change in him, but none of them dared to ask him about it. They had sensed the shift in his spirit, the growing distance between them, and they respected it. They knew he had learned something profound, but they did not question him, did not press him for answers. The temple, once a place of shared community, now felt like an insurmountable barrier between Viro and the world. The sense of connection he had once felt with the monks, with the sacred space they shared, had withered. The others went about their daily tasks with a kind of quiet reverence, as though everything were as it had always been, but Viro could no longer find his place within it. The temple was no longer his refuge. It had become a place of exile. He could feel the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him like an invisible hand. The truth he had uncovered, the gift he had been given, was not something he could keep to himself. He knew that. But the task of sharing it, of teaching it to the world, felt insurmountable. He had seen the faces of kings and warriors, of gods and mortals. He had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the sacrifices of those who had built the temple, the lives of countless souls that had come before him. The knowledge he carried was vast, but it was also overwhelming. The fireflies, the voice of the temple, the stone he held in his hand. They were all symbols of something far greater than he had ever imagined, and yet now that he knew it, he could not escape it. The silence around him grew deeper. He could no longer ignore the weight of his purpose. The temple had shown him the way, had opened his eyes to the truths of the world and the divine, but now it was up to him to act, and that thought terrified him. He had never been one to seek attention, never one to step forward with confidence. His life had been one of quiet devotion, of service to the temple and its teachings. But now the temple was asking him to do more. It was asking him to share its wisdom, to carry its message to the world beyond the temple walls. And he did not know how to do that. Viro's footsteps grew slower as the days passed, his movements becoming more deliberate. The weight of his thoughts seemed to drag him down, and he found himself wandering the temple grounds in a kind of daze. He still performed his duties, still offered prayers and meditations, but his heart was not in them. He could no longer find the peace he had once found in the quiet rituals. The fireflies continued to follow him, their glow like a constant reminder of the truth that weighed on him. He could feel their eyes on him, their watchful gaze, and it made him uneasy. The temple itself had become a living presence, watching, waiting. The burden of his knowledge had become a part of him, and he could not shake it. At night he would often find himself standing in the central courtyard, looking up at the stars. The fireflies would circle around him, their light a soft, flickering halo in the darkness, and he would wonder what was he meant to do with all of this. What was the purpose of the truth he had uncovered? What was the point of carrying this knowledge, this divine wisdom, if it was not meant to be shared? But with each passing day, the question became harder to answer. The temple had not given him the answer, it had simply shown him the way, and now it was up to him to find the path. The other monks, though they said nothing, seemed to sense his growing turmoil. They did not speak to him directly, but their eyes often lingered on him, filled with unspoken questions. They too had felt the shift in his spirit, and they knew that something had changed within him. But Viro could not bring himself to speak of it. He could not bring himself to share the burden that now weighed on him. He was a monk, a servant of the temple, not a teacher, not a leader, but the truth would not be ignored. The more he tried to suppress it, the more it pressed against him, demanding to be acknowledged. And so Viro found himself alone with his thoughts, wandering the temple grounds in the silence of the night, waiting for the answers to come. The fireflies fluttered around him, their soft glow a constant reminder that the temple was watching, waiting for him to step forward. And yet the weight of his purpose pressed down on him, making each step feel heavier than the last. The temple had revealed its secrets to him. Now it was up to him to reveal them to the world. But how? The question remained unanswered, swirling around him like the fireflies in the dark. The burden was his alone to bear, but Viro could not shake the feeling that somehow the world beyond the temple walls was waiting for him to act. One evening, as Viro wandered the familiar temple grounds, he found himself drawn once again to the ancient pillars that lined the edges of the sacred courtyard. These were no ordinary stone columns. Each one was adorned with intricate carvings of gods and kings, warriors and angels, figures of myth and history, who seemed to come alive with every glance. He had passed by them countless times, as he did every evening, his thoughts often absorbed in the quiet hum of his meditations or the weight of his duties. But tonight was different. Tonight the pillars seemed to beckon him with an urgency he had never felt before. It was as though the very air around them was vibrating with some unseen force, calling him closer. The temple, which had long been a sanctuary of silent reverence, now felt charged with energy, something more than just the usual weight of history and devotion. He could not explain it, but a deep stirring in his chest told him that this night would be unlike any other. The fireflies appeared as if on cue, their soft golden lights flickering in the dimming dusk. But tonight they were more numerous than ever, swirling around him in greater swarms, their light bright against the encroaching shadows. They seemed to be following him, moving in delicate, purposeful patterns, as though guiding him, urging him forward. Viro's breath quickened, and the temple grounds that had once seemed so familiar now felt vast, unknowable, as if he were stepping into a deeper layer of its mysteries. The fireflies circled the towering pillars, their flickering glow illuminating the stone faces of the gods. The carvings came alive before his eyes, their detailed forms catching the soft light in ways he had never noticed before. For the first time, the gods, with their serene and powerful expressions, seemed to watch him, his every movement, every breath. It was not just the stone faces that he felt looking at him, but something beyond them, something eternal, as if the gods themselves had turned their gaze upon him. He paused before the pillar that stood tallest among them, his heart pounding in his chest. The stone felt warm under his fingertips, as though it had absorbed the warmth of centuries of devotion. The carvings on the pillar depicted a great king, his crown adorned with flowers, his hands raised in reverence to the divine, while warriors, gods, and mythical creatures swirled around him in an eternal dance. As Viro reached out and placed his palm against the stone, a strange sensation washed over him. The warmth in the stone seemed to pulse under his hand as if it were alive in a way he could not comprehend. The energy surged through him almost like an electric current, sending a shiver down his spine. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he thought he might be overcome by the sensation, by the weight of what the stone was telling him.
He closed his eyes, his fingers pressing deeper into the stone. The carvings under his hand seemed to shift and change as though they were not static, but living, breathing depictions of something greater than himself. The sounds of the night faded into the background, the whisper of the wind, the rustling of the leaves, the distant calls of birds. All of it became a muted hum. In that stillness he began to hear something else, something deeper, something older than the temple itself. Voices, faint at first like whispers carried on the wind, began to swirl around him. They came not from the fireflies or from any human presence, but from the very stones themselves. The voices of those who had carved the figures, those who had built the temple, those who had devoted their lives to the divine. They spoke softly, reverently, as though they were telling him something important, something he had been meant to hear all along.
Viro's mind spun, struggling to focus on the voices, but he could feel them tugging at the edges of his consciousness, urging him to listen closely, to open himself to their message. The words were unclear at first, scattered fragments of ancient languages and prayers long forgotten, but slowly, as if the temple itself were guiding him, the words became clearer, sharper. "They are watching you, Viro." The voice said, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from the very stone beneath his fingers. "The gods are waiting for you to act." The words echoed in his mind, and Viro's heart skipped a beat. He opened his eyes, startled by the intensity of the message. The world around him seemed to shift in that moment, the darkness deepening, as if the night itself were holding its breath, waiting for him to understand. He could still feel the warmth of the stone beneath his hand, and the fireflies danced around him in silent reverence, their light flickering like the stars themselves were holding vigil. The voice was not just a whisper in his ear, it came from within him, as though the temple had opened some hidden part of his soul, exposing the very core of his being. The gods, those stone-carved figures, were not mere symbols. They were alive, watching, waiting for something, waiting for him. The realization hit him like a wave. He had come to this place seeking answers, but now it seemed the answers had been waiting for him all along. The truth he had uncovered, the knowledge he had received from the temple, was not merely for his own understanding. It was a call to action. He was meant to do something with it, to carry it beyond the walls of the temple, to share it with those who were waiting to hear it. Viro's hand trembled as he pulled it away from the pillar. He could feel the weight of the gods' gaze upon him, their silent, unblinking eyes following his every movement. The fireflies, which had once danced freely in the air, now circled him more closely, as though they were part of this sacred moment, bearing witness to the revelation he had just experienced. The warmth in the stone lingered in his palm, and his mind raced with the magnitude of the voice's words. The gods were waiting for him to act, but what did that mean? What was he meant to do? He had spent his life in quiet devotion, seeking peace within the walls of the temple, offering prayers and meditations. But now the temple itself had opened his eyes to something much larger, something far more profound. It was not just about understanding the divine, it was about sharing that understanding with the world. The weight of the god's gaze pressed down on him, urging him to step beyond the confines of the temple and into the world outside a world that had long been disconnected from the truth he had now seen so clearly. Viro's mind swirled with questions, but in the midst of the chaos, he felt a calmness settle over him. The voice of the temple, the whisper of the gods, it was all part of a greater purpose, a purpose that he had now been entrusted with. He had been chosen not just to witness the divine, but to carry its truth into the world, to share it with those who needed it most. He stood for a long moment before the pillar, the fireflies still hovering around him, their gentle glow lighting the stone faces of the gods. Their silent presence, their patient watch felt like an affirmation. The weight of the temple's call of the truth he had been entrusted with was heavy, but he knew it was a burden he could no longer ignore. The time had come for him to act. The gods were watching, waiting for him to do what they had called him to do. And so, with a deep breath, Viro turned away from the pillar, his heart steady in his chest, his purpose clear at last. The fireflies fluttered around him, their soft light casting long shadows on the temple walls as he moved forward toward the unknown. The journey had only just begun, but Viro no longer walked in uncertainty. He walked with purpose, guided by the gods and by the weight of their silent gaze. The time for understanding had passed. Now it was time for him to act. Viro continued to wander the temple grounds, each step more deliberate than the last. The fireflies, which had become a constant presence in his life, followed him, their soft glow flickering like a beacon in the night. Their light had become a companion of sorts, offering guidance and comfort in the solitude that had begun to surround him. Though their presence was gentle, almost ethereal, Viro could not shake the feeling that they were waiting for something just as he was. They had followed him through the temple's vast halls, past statues of gods, kings, and warriors carved into the very stone that had endured for centuries. Yet despite all that he had seen and learned, there was still a deep sense of incompleteness within him. He had uncovered pieces of the puzzle, yes, but the larger picture remained elusive, as if there was something he had yet to discover, some truth that lay just beyond his grasp. The weight of this feeling settled heavily on his chest as he walked the familiar paths, the walls of the temple, echoing with ancient wisdom that seemed to hum through the very air around him. He had meditated on the truths revealed to him, but each time he felt close to understanding, there was a sense of emptiness, as though there was something more he had yet to learn, something that could only be found deep within the heart of the temple. And so he walked on the fireflies fluttering around him in their silent, patient dance, always illuminating the path ahead, but never fully guiding him to the answers he sought. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the temple grounds, Viro found himself standing once again before the altar in the central courtyard. This had been his place of reflection for many days, where he would offer his prayers and meditate in the stillness of the evening. But tonight, as the last rays of light bled into the darkening sky, the temple felt different. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if the very stones beneath his feet were vibrating with energy, resonating with something deep within the earth. The air around him was thick with anticipation, and for the first time in a long while, Viro felt an overwhelming sense of presence, as if the temple itself was watching him, waiting for him to take the next step. The fireflies, which had always hovered nearby, seemed to gather around him in greater numbers tonight. Their light grew brighter, their soft glow flickering more intensely, as though they were responding to something unseen, something that only Viro could sense. He could feel their energy merging with the vibrations in the air, a strange harmony that filled the space around him. It was as if they were guiding him, urging him toward the altar, drawing him closer to the heart of the temple. Viro stepped forward, his feet moving with a sense of purpose he had not felt before. The path before him seemed clear now, more so than it had ever been. The fireflies flitted around him, their lights swirling in intricate patterns, guiding him like a river of stars flowing through the darkening air. He reached out to touch the altar, and as his fingers brushed against the cool stone, the energy surged through him. It was not just the warmth of the stone that he felt. It was as if the very essence of the temple had entered him, flowing through his veins, awakening something deep within him that had remained dormant until now. The power of the temple washed over him, filling him with a sense of clarity he had never known. His mind raced, but there was no fear, no confusion, just an overwhelming sense of connection. He could feel the weight of the history of the temple, the lives of those who had come before him, the countless souls who had sought the truth within these walls.
The fireflies hovered around him now, their light blinding in its intensity, casting long shadows that danced along the walls of the courtyard. They were no longer just small creatures of light, they were part of the temple's energy, part of the great cycle that connected the divine and the mortal, the past and the present. And then in the midst of the surge of energy, the voice spoke again. This time it was louder, more powerful, and it seemed to come not just from the stones or the air, but from within him, resonating in the very core of his being. "You are ready, Viro." The words echoed through his mind, reverberating deep within his soul. For a moment he stood there frozen, unable to move or speak. The fireflies swirled around him, their light casting an otherworldly glow across the courtyard. It was as if the temple itself had recognized his readiness, his willingness to accept the burden that had been placed upon him. The truth he had uncovered was no longer something to be understood or studied. It was something to be lived, something to be carried forward into the world. The fireflies, the altar, the temple, it was all part of the larger truth that now pulsed through his veins, an unspoken promise that he had been chosen for something greater than himself. Viro closed his eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath. The path ahead was no longer clouded with uncertainty. The knowledge he had gained was no longer a burden, it was a gift, a divine calling. He had seen the truth, had felt its power, and now it was time to share it with the world beyond the temple walls.
The weight of the responsibility had settled into his heart, and though it was heavy, he felt no fear. The fireflies, the energy, the voice, they had all prepared him for this moment. He had been called, chosen to carry the truth of the temple to those who needed it most. With his mind cleared, his heart resolute, and the fireflies glowing brightly around him, Viro stepped back from the altar. The temple was no longer just a place of worship. It was his starting point, his beginning, the foundation upon which he would build the future. He had been entrusted with a sacred mission, and now it was up to him to fulfill it. As he turned to leave the courtyard, the fireflies followed him, their soft glow lighting the way. The path ahead was unknown, but Viro no longer felt lost. The journey that awaited him was one of discovery, one of teaching and learning, but most of all it was a journey of sharing the truth he had found. He had been shown the heart of the temple, and now he was ready to carry that light into the world. The temple's power still surged through him, filling his chest with warmth and purpose. He could feel the weight of the truth, but it was not a burden to bear alone. It was a gift to be shared, a beacon to guide others. And as he walked into the unknown, he knew that he was not alone. The fireflies circled around him, their light like a promise, and in the silence of the night, Viro understood the journey had only just begun. Viro could no longer tell where he ended and the temple began. The connection between them had deepened beyond recognition, each stone, each carving, each whisper of the wind now echoing with the pulse of his own heartbeat. The temple had become a part of him, as much a part of his soul as his breath, his thoughts, his every movement. The ancient walls no longer felt like mere stones. They were living, breathing entities with stories to tell. The sacred grounds, once distant and mysterious, had woven themselves into the fabric of his existence. They spoke to him in ways he had not anticipated, urging him to understand that the knowledge he had sought was not his alone to hold. It was a gift meant to be shared, a truth to be passed on to others, to be carried into the world beyond the temple's walls. His journey was no longer a solitary one. It had become part of a greater cycle, a legacy that stretched across time. One evening, as Viro wandered the temple's outer walls, the air felt different. The familiar scent of earth and stone, the low hum of the temple's energy, all seemed to shimmer with an unfamiliar intensity. The wind itself seemed to carry something, a presence just on the edge of his perception, as though the temple were drawing in a long, slow breath, preparing for something. The fireflies had returned, but they were no longer the playful swarms of light he had seen in the past. They were more focused now, more deliberate, their tiny bodies pulsing with a light that seemed to beat in rhythm with his own heart. It was as though they were mirroring the very pulse of the temple, and with each fluttering movement they beckoned him forward, urging him to listen, to understand. Viro stopped in his tracks, his eyes drawn to the dimming horizon as the last light of the day began to fade. He stood alone, surrounded by the shadows of the temple, his thoughts as heavy as the stones beneath his feet. The weight of the temple's history was pressing down on him, and for the first time since he had arrived, he felt the true responsibility of the truth he had uncovered. The teachings of the temple, the visions, the divine wisdom, it was all a part of something far greater than himself. And as the fireflies circled him, their glow intensifying, he felt the air shift once again. A familiar presence filled the space around him, and in that instant he knew that the voice that had guided him, that had spoken to him in moments of quiet reverence, was speaking to him once more. Do you remember, Viro, the voices of those who came before you? The voice, gentle and resonant, filled the air around him, carrying with it the weight of centuries. Viro paused, his hand reaching instinctively for one of the ancient stones that lined the path. The stone was cold under his fingers, its surface weathered by the passage of time, but as his skin made contact with it, a strange warmth began to emanate from within. He closed his eyes and breathed in deeply, feeling the pulse of the temple's history surrounding him. For a fleeting moment he was no longer standing in the present, no longer in the temple as it was now. He was transported through time, swept into a vision of the past. He saw the first monks who had come to these sacred grounds. Their faces were serene but marked with the fatigue of long journeys, their eyes filled with quiet determination. They had traveled through dense forests, across rivers, through lands unknown to bring the teachings of the divine to this place. He could see their hands rough and calloused from years of labor, their hearts full of devotion as they worked to build the first stone walls, to carve the first images of the gods into the stone. The weight of their sacrifice was immense, yet there was peace in their eyes, a peace that came from knowing they were part of something far greater than themselves. The vision shifted, and Viro saw the builders of the temple, the men and women who had labored under the sun, their muscles straining as they chipped away at the rock with ancient tools, carving intricate patterns and images into the stone with painstaking precision. Their hands, though worn, moved with purpose, guided by a higher calling. They did not build for themselves. They built for the future, for the generations that would come after them, for the sacred space that would endure long after they were gone. Then the vision shifted again. The air grew heavy with the tension of battle, the sounds of clashing swords and shields reverberating through the temple walls. Viro saw the kings and warriors who had once walked these lands, their eyes burning with ambition, their faces etched with the scars of battle. They were not just rulers, they were protectors of a legacy, of a truth that had been entrusted to them. The blood they shed in the name of their gods was both a sacrifice and a duty. He saw their faces proud, fierce, yet burdened with the weight of their roles. And amidst the kings and warriors, he saw something else, the people. The ones whose names had been forgotten, the ones who had worked in the shadows, whose sweat and blood had been poured into the temple's creation. They had not fought on the battlefield or ruled from thrones, but they had given their lives to something far more lasting. They had built the temple, carved its stones, and preserved its wisdom. They had done so with love, with devotion, and with the understanding that their efforts would endure through the ages. Viro opened his eyes, the vision fading as quickly as it had come. He stood there, his hand still resting on the stone, the fireflies swirling around him in a silent dance. He felt the weight of the past pressing on him.
the voices of those who had come before him echoing through the chambers of the temple, their words, their sacrifices, their love for the divine. He had glimpsed their lives, their struggles, and their devotion, and now he understood their legacy was his to carry. I remember Viro whispered, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. The words were a quiet reverence, a recognition of the truth that had been passed down to him. He could feel the presence of those who had come before him. The monks, the builders, the warriors, the laborers, each of them a thread in the tapestry of the temple's existence. I remember them. They are part of you now, the voice replied softly. You carry their legacy, their truth, and it is time to share it. The words struck him like a lightning bolt. He had always thought of the temple as a place of refuge, a place of personal discovery, a sanctuary where he could find peace. But now the true nature of his journey became clear. The knowledge he had received, the truth that had been revealed to him, was not for him alone. It was a gift, a divine calling, and it was his responsibility to share it with the world. The weight of this realization settled over him, but it was not a burden. It was a purpose. He had come to the temple seeking answers, but now he understood that those answers were part of a larger story, one that had been unfolding long before he had arrived and would continue long after he was gone. The teachings, the truth, the wisdom of the temple, it was not something to be hoarded, not something to be kept hidden. It was something to be shared, to be passed on to those who were ready to listen, to carry the message forward into the world. Viro stood there, the fireflies fluttering around him, their glow soft and steady in the night. The temple had revealed its secrets to him, but now it was time for him to reveal them to the world. The voices of the past had become part of him, their legacy intertwined with his own. He had been chosen to carry it, to teach it, and to help others see the truth that had been hidden in plain sight for centuries. He took a deep breath, the weight of his responsibility settling firmly on his shoulders, and for the first time since he had arrived at the temple, he felt a deep sense of peace. The path ahead was clear. The temple's wisdom was his to share, and with it he would walk the world, teaching those who were ready to hear the ancient truths that had shaped the past. The journey had only just begun. As the days flowed seamlessly into one another, Viro felt himself becoming more intertwined with the temple. It was as if the ground beneath his feet, the very soil that had been trodden by countless generations before him, had become part of his being. The earth, heavy with its history, had seeped into his soul, and the sky, once vast and distant, now seemed an extension of himself, as though he could reach out and touch it, the infinite stretch of stars and clouds, no longer something separate, but a horizon that he carried within. He had come to understand the temple in a way he never had before, not just as a sacred space, but as a living, breathing entity, something far greater than the sum of its stones and carvings. The wisdom it had shared with him had rooted itself deep in his heart. The monks around him, too, had begun to notice the change. His quiet wisdom was more apparent now. His distant gaze, often lost in thought, had taken on a new quality, something deeper, as though he were seeing into realms beyond the physical world. They could feel it, the shift in his spirit, but no one dared speak of it. Viro had become a silent mystery, someone whose presence was both comforting and unsettling, like the stillness of the temple grounds themselves. His transformation was palpable, but still the other monks refrained from asking. They had sensed the change, but how could they comprehend what had happened? The truth that Viro had uncovered was beyond the grasp of their daily routines and meditations. One morning after his meditation, Viro stood before the monks in the central courtyard. The sky above was pale with the early light, and the air was heavy with the scent of incense that still lingered from the evening prayers. The fireflies had begun to gather in the corners of the temple, their soft glow barely visible against the brightness of the rising sun.
Yet their presence was undeniable, like quiet sentinels watching over the temple, their light a gentle whisper against the growing heat of the day. Viro's voice, when he spoke, was calm but firm. It carried a weight that made the monks listen closely, their curiosity piqued by the shift in his tone. "There is a path we must walk," he began, his gaze sweeping over the gathered monks, "one that has been lost for many generations." His words lingered in the air like an invitation to something unknown. "It is the path of the dreamers, the ones who sought not only to build temples of stone, but to build temples of the heart." The monks exchanged quiet glances, their faces inscrutable, but their eyes revealed something deeper: questions, uncertainty, a hunger for understanding that had been awakened by his words. Viro had always been a man of few words, a monk devoted to quiet contemplation, but now his words felt different. They felt like a call, an invitation to something far beyond their daily rituals. The fireflies, as if sensing the change in the air, flickered in the corners of the courtyard, their light shimmering with purpose. Viro paused for a moment, letting the silence settle between them. "We must look beyond the stone," he continued, his voice steady, yet there was an urgency in his words now, as though they carried the weight of a truth he had come to know intimately. "The stone has served its purpose. The temple, with all its grandeur, has been built. But now we must listen to the whispers of the past, the truth that lies beneath the stone in the hearts of those who came before us. The fireflies." He gestured to the swarming insects that hovered around them, their light flickering in delicate patterns, "are the keepers of this truth. They are the messengers between worlds, between the past and the present. They will guide us." Viro's words hung in the air, the weight of them settling over the monks like a cloud. They were not merely words, they were a revelation, a call to something greater, something unseen. The monks stood still, absorbing the message. They did not speak, but their eyes followed the firefly's flight, tracing their erratic, graceful movements as though trying to understand the meaning behind Viro's words. The courtyard felt different now, charged with the same energy that had been building in Viro for weeks. A quiet pulse that had intensified since the day he first learned the secrets of the temple. It was as though the fireflies had become conduits for something divine, something ancient, something the monks could no longer ignore. "Come," Viro said softly, breaking the silence. He turned without waiting for an answer, his movements deliberate, his feet carrying him with a new sense of purpose. The monks followed him in silence, a sense of reverence hanging in the air as they moved together, their sandals whispering against the stone. The fireflies, now glowing brighter in the fading light of morning, seemed to lead them, darting ahead, guiding them through the familiar paths of the temple and toward the unknown. The path they took was not one Viro had walked before. It led them beyond the temple's heart, through overgrown courtyards where the stone had been forgotten, to a secluded grove at the farthest edge of the grounds. This place had been untouched for centuries, its trees old and gnarled, their roots tangled in the earth like veins in the body of the temple. The air here was thick with the scent of moss and damp earth, and the ground was soft beneath their feet, as though the earth itself had been waiting for them to return. The fireflies gathered in the air above them, their light pulsing like a heartbeat, as though the grove itself was alive, watching, waiting. Viro stopped at the edge of the grove, his eyes scanning the sacred space. This place, untouched by time, was a threshold, a place between the known and the unknown, between the divine and the mortal. It was here Viro knew that the true meaning of his journey would be revealed. He turned to face the monks who had gathered around him. Their eyes were wide with uncertainty, but also with something else, a quiet anticipation, a recognition that they They had come to a place where the temple's secrets would be unveiled. "This is the path of the dreamers," Viro said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "The ones who saw beyond the walls of the temple, who understood that the greatest truth lies not in the stone, but in the hearts of those who walk the earth. They built temples of the heart, not of stone, and now we must do the same." The monks remained silent, but their eyes held something new, a spark of understanding, a flicker of recognition that they had not known before. They could feel it too, the pull of something greater, something that lay just beyond their reach, waiting to be discovered. The fireflies swarmed around them, their light illuminating the path ahead. Viro led them further into the grove, and as they walked, the air seemed to grow heavier, charged with a presence that was both ancient and immediate. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of long-forgotten voices, the whispers of those who had come before. The fireflies fluttered in the air, their light dancing with purpose, guiding them deeper into the sacred space. They walked in silence, each monk lost in his thoughts, feeling the weight of what Viro had said, of what he had revealed. The truth that lay beneath the stone was not a thing to be understood with the mind alone. It was a truth that had to be felt, experienced. And now they were walking the path of the dreamers, the path that would lead them beyond the limits of their understanding, beyond the walls of the temple, into a new realm of existence, one where the heart and the spirit were as important as the stone and the divine. Viro could feel the temple's energy pulsing beneath the earth, a quiet rhythm that matched his heartbeat. The fireflies led them to the heart of the grove, to a clearing where the air was thick with the scent of ancient growth, where the trees seemed to stand as guardians of a truth long buried. Here at the center of the temple's heart, Viro understood this was not just a place of silence and solitude. This was a place of awakening. It was a place where the temple's greatest secret would be revealed, where the dreamers of the past would speak through him, and where the path to the future would unfold before them. The monks stood in a circle around him, the fireflies swirling in the air above, their light growing brighter with each passing moment. The silence of the grove was heavy, pregnant with possibility. Viro raised his hand, feeling the energy of the earth beneath him, and in that moment he understood. This was not the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. The path of the dreamers had led them here to this moment, and now the real work would begin. The fireflies flickered around them, their light a constant reminder of the truth they had come to find. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. The journey was not just about discovery, it was about sharing, about awakening the hearts of those who had forgotten, those who had been lost in the shadows of the temple walls. The truth had been revealed, and now Viro was ready to carry it forward. The grove was thick with trees, their gnarled branches weaving together like ancient veins coursing through the earth. The canopy above was dense, blocking out much of the sun's light, leaving the space beneath in a perpetual twilight. The air felt heavy with moisture, thick with the scent of damp earth, and the faint sweetness of jasmine that seemed to hang in the air like a forgotten memory. It was a place where the sunlight struggled to break through the dense foliage, and in its absence the moonlight filtered through in ethereal silver beams, casting long shadows on the ground that stretched like fingers reaching out into the unknown. The stillness in the grove was palpable, as though the world itself held its breath. The ground was soft beneath Viro's feet, the earth rich with the scent of life and decay in equal measure. This place was older than anything he had encountered in the temple. It was a living memory, a place untouched by time where the pulse of the past seemed to linger caught between the world of the gods and the world of men. The fireflies that had followed him here flickered in the air, their tiny lights twinkling like stars, guiding him deeper into the heart of the grove.
They danced around him in slow, deliberate patterns, their glow intensifying as they neared the center of the clearing. Viro's heart beat faster as he moved forward. The fireflies hovered around him like a swarm of silent watchers, their presence becoming almost overwhelming in the thick, humid air. At the center of the grove, half hidden by the shadows of the trees, stood a statue, an ancient weathered deity whose face had been eroded by time. The stone was rough, the features faded, but even in its decay there was an undeniable power radiating from it. The statue's eyes were closed, its expression serene, but there was something in the way it stood as if it had once been a living god frozen in a moment of sacred reverence.
It was clear this was no ordinary figure. This was the heart of the temple, the place where the divine had once walked in flesh and blood, where the whispers of the gods had turned to stone. Viro stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the statue. As he neared, he could feel the power emanating from it, deep and untamed, like a force that had been waiting for him to arrive. The fireflies hovered around it, their glow intensifying as if they were drawn to the very essence of the stone. They circled the deity in intricate patterns, their light flickering and pulsing in unison, creating a surreal, otherworldly scene. Viro's breath caught in his throat. For a long moment he simply stood there, his heart heavy with the weight of what this place represented. This was no ordinary temple. This was the origin of all that had come after. This was where the gods had once breathed life into the temple, where their whispers had turned to stone, creating a bridge between the mortal and the divine. The truth that had been hidden here for centuries, the truth he had sought, was buried beneath the layers of time and stone, waiting for someone to uncover it. And now it seemed that someone was him. He stepped closer to the statue, feeling an unspoken pull urging him forward until he was standing directly before it. The air around him seemed to shimmer with the weight of its presence. The fireflies fluttered around him in a silent dance, their light casting eerie shadows on the stone as if they were watching, waiting for him to do something. Viro hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering just above the cold surface of the statue, and then, with a steady breath, he placed his hand on the base of the deity's pedestal. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy coursed through him. It was like a wave crashing against his body, flooding him with a warmth so intense it felt as though the very heart of the temple had entered him. The stone beneath his hand seemed to pulse with life, as though it had been awakened by his touch. His heart raced, and for a brief moment he was overwhelmed by the sensation of the temple's energy rushing through him, filling every fiber of his being. He closed his eyes and allowed the energy to wash over him, his body trembling under its intensity. The air around him seemed to shift, growing heavier, more charged. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on him, the echoes of the past reverberating through the very stone that surrounded him. And then the visions returned, more vivid, more real than before. They came like a flood, overwhelming his senses, as though the very walls of the temple had dissolved, and he was now standing in the midst of the past. Viro saw the gods not as distant abstract figures carved in stone, but as beings of flesh and blood, their eyes burning with passion and pain. He saw them as they had once walked the earth, their hands trembling with the weight of creation, their hearts heavy with the burden of their divine purpose. He saw the sacrifices they had made, the decisions they had struggled with, the cost of their immortality. They were not perfect as he had once imagined them, but flawed and real, struggling with the same questions and doubts that plagued humanity. Their eyes met his, filled with a longing that transcended time, as if they were waiting for him to understand, waiting for him to see what they had seen. The vision shifted, and he saw the first monks, their faces serene but weary from their long journey.
They had walked these very grounds, seeking something greater, something beyond themselves. They had come to the temple with nothing but their faith, and in doing so, they had carved the foundation of the temple, shaping it with their hands, shaping it with their devotion. Viro felt their presence, felt their struggles, their triumphs, their devotion.
They had given their lives to this place, to this sacred space, so that others could find the truth that had eluded them. And now he understood. He was a part of that legacy, a link in the chain that had been forged through time. The images continued to flood his mind, visions of the builders of the temple, their hands rough and calloused, chipping away at the stone with determination and reverence. The kings and warriors who had once ruled over these lands, their faces marked with the scars of battle and sacrifice. The faces of those who had given everything to the temple, the nameless ones who had worked in the shadows, whose labor had made the temple what it was. They were all a part of the same story, a story that stretched across generations, across lifetimes, and now Viro was the one who would carry it forward. For a long moment he lost himself in the images, his body trembling as the energy of the temple coursed through him. He could feel their presence, their voices, echoing in his mind, urging him to understand, to carry their legacy. The past had come alive within him, and the weight of it was overwhelming. The temple's truth, once hidden, was now his to bear. The path forward was no longer uncertain. The vision of the gods, of the monks, of the builders and kings, they had all led him here to this moment, to this understanding. Viro opened his eyes, his breath shallow, his heart racing. The fireflies were still swirling around him, their light now more vibrant, more purposeful than ever. The grove was silent, but it felt alive with the presence of those who had come before him. The air was thick with the weight of their gaze, their silent watch over him, as he stood there, the truth of the temple pulsing within him. "They are part of you now," the voice of the temple whispered once more, its tone gentle but filled with quiet power. "You carry their legacy, their truth, and it is time to share it." Viro stood there, his hand still resting on the statue, the weight of the past heavy upon him. He had come to this place seeking answers, but what he had found was something far greater, something beyond the reach of time, beyond the grasp of the gods themselves. The truth was not just a revelation, it was a responsibility. He was the keeper of it now, and it was his task to carry it into the world, to teach those who were ready to listen, to share the knowledge that had been passed down through the ages. With a final deep breath, Viro stepped back from the statue. The fireflies hovered around him, their light now a constant presence in the air. The path ahead was clear, but it would not be easy. The truth he carried was a heavy burden, but it was a burden he would bear with honor. The journey was far from over, but for the first time Viro knew his purpose. The heart of the temple had revealed its secrets, and now it was up to him to carry them forward. When Viro opened his eyes, the grove had fallen silent. The fireflies, those glowing messengers, had dissipated their light, fading as if they had never been there at all. The air was thick with an almost tangible heaviness, as though the entire world were holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. The moonlight, which had danced through the trees just moments before, now seemed muted, as if it too was subdued by the weight of the moment. The monks had gathered around him, standing in a quiet, reverent circle. Their faces were a mixture of awe and confusion. Some stared at him with wide eyes, as though they had seen something they could not fully comprehend. Others looked down, lost in their thoughts, trying to process the overwhelming energy that had filled the grove only moments before. They had all felt it, the surge of power that had emanated from the statue, from the very earth beneath them. They had sensed something profound, something ancient and untold, but it was clear that they did not fully understand what it meant. Viro stood, his hand still resting lightly on the base of the statue, the warmth of the stone still lingering in his fingertips. He felt the pulse of the temple within him, the heartbeat of something far older than any of them. It was as if the temple itself was alive, and he, now a part of it, could feel its pulse in every cell of his body. He knew what had to be done. The truth had been revealed, but it was not enough to simply know it. Now it was time to act. "The time has come for us to cross into the unknown," Viro said softly, his voice steady but carrying the weight of everything that had come before. His words were simple, but they reverberated in the stillness of the grove like a call to something greater. The temple holds the key, but it is up to us to unlock it. The gods have shown us their truth, but now we must bring it into the world. There was a long pause, and the monks exchanged uncertain glances. Their faces were a tapestry of confusion, doubt, and fear, each man grappling with the magnitude of Viro's words. They had spent their entire lives within the safety of the temple walls, seeking only to maintain the peace of their sacred space, to preserve the traditions that had been passed down through generations. To them, the temple was a place of refuge, a place where the divine and the mortal could meet in quiet communion. The idea of venturing beyond its walls, of carrying its wisdom into the world, was as foreign to them as the idea of stepping into the unknown. But there were no words of protest, no open defiance. The doubt was palpable, like a thick fog that hung between them, but it was not enough to stop them. They were monks, after all. They had given their lives to the temple, to its teachings, to the divine energy that flowed through its stones. And Viro was one of them. He had always been one of them. His words held weight because of the wisdom they had seen in him, because of the vision he had shown them. And now, as much as they feared the unknown, they could not deny the truth of what he said. Something had changed. Something had shifted. The fireflies, the temple, the very air, they had all called them to this moment. Viro sensed the uncertainty within them, but he could also feel the stirrings of something else, something stronger than fear. It was a glimmer of hope, of possibility. His vision, the path he had set before them, was not easy, but it was a path forward, and that was something the monks could not ignore. He turned to face them, his gaze steady, his voice clear. "The fireflies have led us here, but it is we who must now walk the path they have illuminated. Together we will carry the temple's wisdom into the world. Together we will awaken the dreams of those who have forgotten." Viro's words were simple, but they cut through the uncertainty like a blade. He spoke of dreams of awakening, of something far greater than the temple itself, something that lay beyond its walls, beyond its stones. The temple was not an end. It was a beginning. And now it was time to share that beginning with the world. The monks stood still, their expressions unreadable, but their eyes had softened. They were not yet certain, but they were listening. They were ready to follow. With those words, Viro turned toward the temple's entrance, his steps slow and deliberate. The monks followed him one by one in a quiet procession. There was no fanfare, no loud proclamations, only the soft rustling of robes, the faint echo of sandals against stone, and the distant hum of the temple's energy as it resonated through the air. The fireflies, which had been waiting at the edges of the grove, began to flutter around them once more. Their glow had grown brighter, more intense, as if they were responding to the call of the temple, to the promise of the path that lay ahead. The fireflies swarmed around them, their light flickering in intricate patterns as they danced before and behind the monks, lighting the path ahead with their soft, steady glow. The world outside the temple had always seemed distant, foreign even. But now, as Viro walked toward the entrance, he felt the world shifting. The air felt different, charged with an energy that he had not felt before. The fireflies had always been his guides, but now they were leading him and the monks into something much greater. A journey that would take them far beyond the walls of the temple. Viro knew that the road ahead was not an easy one. There would be obstacles, there would be doubt, and there would be moments of fear. But there was also something else, something far more powerful. The truth that had been revealed to him to them was not a truth to be kept hidden. It was a truth to be shared, to be spread throughout the world, to awaken the hearts of those who had long since forgotten. The temple in all its majesty had shown them the way, but now it was time for them to take that knowledge and bring it into the world. The monks walked behind Viro, each of them lost in their thoughts, the weight of what was unfolding settling on their shoulders. They had always known that the temple held great wisdom, but they had never imagined that the world outside could be so intimately connected to it. They had lived within its walls for so long, trusting that the divine energy of the temple was enough. But now Viro's words had opened their eyes to a new reality, one where they had a responsibility not just to the temple, but to the world beyond it. Viro reached the entrance of the temple, his eyes resting on the ancient doors that had stood for centuries. They were not just barriers, they were thresholds, gateways between the sacred and the mundane, between the divine and the human. He placed his hand on the door, feeling the cool stone beneath his fingers, the energy of the temple pulsing through him. This was it. The moment had arrived. He pushed the doors open, the sound of the ancient hinges creaking, echoing through the stillness. The monks followed him, their steps hesitant but resolute. As they stepped out into the open air, the light of the fireflies illuminated the path before them. The world beyond the temple was vast, unknown, and yet it felt more familiar than ever. The journey was long, but it was a journey they would take together with the wisdom of the temple guiding them. Viro took a deep breath and looked ahead, the path stretching before them like an open road. The journey had only just begun, but he was no longer uncertain. The world awaited. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you think someone else would enjoy this story, share it with them. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next one.